You are crouched beside a mechanic in a narrow garage outside Nagoya. He is holding up a part smaller than a coat button. He smiles. He says this tiny thing has saved more engines than any tool on his wall. I did not believe him. I do now. Here is the truth I carried home. The Japanese mechanics I lived among did not keep their cars running for 200,000 miles with expensive machines or secret chemicals. They did it with 5 cheap parts that most of us in the West throw away, ignore, or never even learn the name of. Parts that cost less than a sandwich. Parts your own mechanic probably skips. This is not folklore. It grew out of a hard, unforgiving inspection system Japan built in 1951, a system that punished neglect and rewarded small, patient habits. And by the time I reach the 5th part, I am going to show you a $2 piece that lets you read the future of your engine months before it breaks. I found it on the workbench of a man who had been repairing the same neighborhood's cars for 40 years. You do not need a new car. You do not need a garage. You need to know what to ask for. Let me take you back there. When I first arrived, I thought I understood cars. I had owned 5 of them across my life. I had paid for every repair a dealership ever invented. I changed my oil on a sticker schedule and never thought twice about the little details underneath. I believed, like most of us are taught to believe, that keeping a car alive was mostly about money and luck. The first thing that cracked that belief was a copper ring. I was watching an old mechanic named Sato drain the oil from a delivery van. The van had over 300,000 kilometers on it. That is nearly 200,000 miles, and the engine still ran as smooth as water. When he pulled the drain plug, he did something my mechanics back home had never once done in front of me. He reached into a little drawer, took out a fresh copper washer, and threw the old one away. I asked him why. He looked at me like I had asked why he breathed. That little ring is called a crush washer. It sits between the drain plug and the oil pan. Every time you tighten the plug, the soft metal crushes slightly and forms a perfect seal. But here is the part almost nobody in the West is told. Once you crush it, it is done. It has given its shape. Reuse it, and it will never seal that well again. A tiny weep begins. A drop here, a drop there. You lose oil so slowly you never notice, until one summer day your engine runs a quart low, and the heat starts eating your bearings from the inside. Sato bought those washers in bags of 100. In yen, each one cost him about the equivalent of 20 cents. 20 cents. He replaced it at every single oil change without exception because he had spent his life watching what happened to the cars of people who did not. Back home, I had never been offered one. Not once. My oil changes reused the same plug and the same tired washer for years, and I paid extra for synthetic oil while the cheapest seal in the whole system was quietly failing. I felt something I would feel many more times in Japan. Not anger exactly. More like the strange embarrassment of learning that the answer had been 20 cents the whole time. So I started asking for one every oil change. You can too. When you take your car in, tell them plainly, replace the drain plug crush washer. I will pay for it. It is pennies. If you change your own oil, buy the small box that matches your plug size and never reuse the old one. That single habit stops the slow leak that ages more engines than hard driving ever will. But a sealed pan means nothing if what is happening up top is starving your engine of its fire. And that led me to the second part, the one that started an argument between me and a man I had grown to trust. The second part was a spark plug, and I thought I already knew everything a person could know about spark plugs. The mechanic this time was younger, a man named Kenji, who ran a tiny 2-bay shop where the radio always played old Enka songs. I watched him pull a spark plug from a customer's sedan and hold it up to the light like a jeweler inspecting a stone. Then he reached for a new one, and I saw the tip. Instead of the fat, familiar electrode I knew, this one ended in a wire so fine it looked like a needle. That needle is Iridium, and the story behind it is pure Japan. There is a company called NGK, founded in the city of Nagoya in 1936. For decades they made ordinary plugs like everyone else, but their engineers kept chasing a problem. A thick spark plug electrode steals energy from its own spark, The metal pulls heat and voltage away from the very flame it is trying to create. Make the tip thinner, and the spark jumps easier, burns cleaner, and needs less push from your ignition. The trouble was, thin metal burns away fast, so they needed a metal that could be made into a needle and still survive the fire. They found iridium, one of the hardest, most heat-resistant metals on Earth. A rival Japanese company, Denso, brought the first iridium plugs to the mass market in 1997, and these plugs did something that sounded impossible. They lasted. Where a cheap copper plug might need changing every 20,000 miles, a good iridium plug could run 60,000, even 100,000, and fire cleaner the entire time. Now here is where Kenji and I argued. I told him iridium plugs cost 3 or 4 times what the cheap ones cost, so how could he call them cheap? He put down his tools and did the arithmetic for me right there on a scrap of paper. A cheap plug that you replace 3 or 4 times over the same distance costs you more in parts and far more in labor, and in all the days you drove on a weak, dirty spark burning extra fuel. The iridium plug, spread across its long life, was the cheaper part. It only looked expensive on the day you bought it. I felt foolish, because I had made the exact mistake he was describing for 30 years. I had always bought the cheapest plug on the shelf. I thought I was saving money. I was actually paying more, over and over, for a weaker spark and worse fuel economy, and I never connected my rough idle and my sinking gas mileage to those 4 little copper plugs slowly rounding off inside my engine. So when you change your plugs, ask specifically for iridium and ask for NGK or Denso by name. Write those 2 names down. They are the companies that invented the technology, and their plugs are sold in nearly every parts store in the West for a price that will surprise you. A cleaner spark means smoother starts, steadier idle, and fuel that goes further. That is not a luxury. That is the cheapest performance upgrade a normal person can buy. But a perfect spark and a sealed pan still cannot save the part of your car that fails most often from something nobody thinks to prevent. And what I saw next changed how I felt about the brakes under my own feet. The third part is not really a part at all. It is a grease. A gray, slippery grease in a small tube, and the first time I saw a mechanic use it, I thought he was wasting his time. His name was Old Man Watanabe, and he was the one with 40 years in the same neighborhood. He had a brake caliper apart on the bench, and he was taking 2 metal pins, the ones that let the brake pads slide, and coating them with this gray paste before sliding them back into their little rubber sleeves. I asked what it was. He said one word that I would hear again and again from every serious mechanic I met: molybdenum. Molybdenum disulfide. The Japanese shorten it to moly. It is a mineral that Japanese industry fell in love with after the Second World War because it does something ordinary grease cannot. It clings to metal under crushing pressure and extreme heat and refuses to be squeezed out. It survives exactly the conditions that live inside a brake. Here is what Watanabe explained to me, and here is why it matters to your safety and your wallet. Inside a modern brake, the pads have to slide freely on those little pins as they wear down. When the pins dry out or rust, the pad stops sliding. It gets stuck partly pressed against the disc. Now you are driving with one brake half on all the time. You feel it as a pull or a shimmy or brakes that wear out unevenly and far too soon. Most people never know why. They just pay for new pads and new discs every couple of years and assume that is normal. It is not normal. Watanabe had customers whose brakes lasted twice as long as anyone expected because at every service he pulled those pins, cleaned them, and coated them fresh with moly grease. The tube cost him almost nothing and lasted for dozens of cars. A few cents of grease was saving his neighbors hundreds in premature brake jobs and keeping them safer at every stop. I had never once in my entire life been told that brake pins need grease. My brakes had squealed and pulled and worn out early, and every time I had simply paid for the whole assembly to be replaced. The idea that the fix was a smear of gray paste worth a few pennies made me sit down on his stool and just breathe for a moment. That feeling right there, the one where you realize nobody ever told you the cheap and honest answer, is exactly why I sat down and wrote all of this out properly. Everything I can fit into a video is the surface. In my books, I go slow, page after page, and I teach you how to read your own car in about 10 minutes with no tools and no guessing, how to know what your dashboard is really saying, which fuel system products are proven, and which are colored water, which features you already paid for and have never once used, and how ordinary use sedans get pushed far past 300,000 miles instead of dying young. Over 329 pages of real content written for a man who has never touched a modern engine and is tired of being told to trust the invoice. Same voice you are hearing now, just with room to explain it all the way through. If you want it, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment, and the collection is yours. Now stay with me, because there is something I want to say to those of you who never pick up a wrench at all. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now, and I want to speak to you directly, because this next part is for you especially. You are thinking, this is all very nice, but I do not turn my own wrenches. I do not own a garage full of tools. I take my car to a shop, and I feel a little helpless there, and maybe I am not as young as I once was. You feel like this Japanese wisdom belongs to people with more strength or more skill than you have left. I promise you it does not, and here is exactly how you use every part I have shown you without lifting a single tool. You use your voice. That is the whole secret. The Japanese mechanics I watched were not magicians. They were simply doing small, cheap, correct things that Western shops skip to save time, and you have the power to ask for those exact things by name. Keep a small card in your glove box. On that card, write 4 lines. Replace the drain plug crush washer at every oil change. Use NGK or Denso Iridium spark plugs. Clean and grease the brake slide pins with moly grease at every brake service. And the 4th line, which I am about to give you, when you hand a mechanic a card like that, everything changes. You are no longer a person things are done to. You are a person who knows the names. A good mechanic will respect it. A lazy one will suddenly become careful because he knows you are watching the details. I have watched shy retirees walk into a shop with a list like that and walk out with work done properly for the first time in years. You do not need strength. You need the words. And I am handing you the words. So let me give you that 4th line, because it is the part that fails silently and costs the most when it goes. The 4th part is a small plastic valve about the size of your thumb, and it is the single most ignored part in the entire engine. It is called the PCV valve. Positive crankcase ventilation. Do not let the long name scare you. What it does is simple, and what happens when it fails is expensive. I learned about it the hard way, through a customer of Kenji's who came in with an oil leak so bad it looked like the engine was crying. The man was ready to pay for a huge repair, gaskets and seals, hundreds of dollars of labor. Kenji told him to wait. He reached in, pulled out a clogged little plastic valve, and replaced it with one that cost about the price of 2 coffees. The leak stopped within a week. Here is why. As your engine runs, pressure and vapors build up inside the crankcase, down where the oil lives. The PCV valve is the little door that lets those vapors escape and get burned cleanly instead of building up. When that valve clogs with age, the pressure has nowhere to go. It pushes against your gaskets and seals from the inside until they leak. It can even push oil where it does not belong and foul everything. People pay thousands chasing the leaks. The real culprit is a $2 valve that should have been changed years ago. In Japan, this was routine. Because of that strict inspection system, born in 1951, the one they call shaken, cars are examined so thoroughly and so regularly that mechanics got in the habit of replacing cheap wear items before they caused expensive damage. The PCV valve was one of those quiet automatic replacements. A few dollars every so often, and the whole engine breathes right and stays dry. I went home and checked my own car. My PCV valve had never been changed in the entire life of the vehicle. Never. It rattled with gunk when I shook it. I replaced it myself in about 5 minutes with a part that cost less than lunch, and a faint oil smell I had lived with for years simply disappeared. I stood in my driveway holding that filthy little valve, thinking about all the money and worry it could have cost me if it had finally pushed a seal out. So add that fourth line to your card. Ask when the PCV valve was last replaced, and ask for a new one if it has been more than a few years. It is cheap, it is fast, and it protects the expensive gaskets that keep your oil where it belongs. But everything I have told you so far only helps you fix what is already known. None of it answered the question that had been growing in me the whole time I lived there. How did these old mechanics always seem to know a car was going to fail before it failed? How did Watanabe look at an engine and say, "This one, watch this one closely," and be right months later? That answer is the fifth part, and it is the one almost nobody outside Japan has ever heard of. I noticed it by accident. Every time Watanabe drained an engine's oil, he did not just pour it out and move on. He caught the drain plug in his fingers and studied it. He held it under his lamp and turned it slowly, reading it, the way you might read a letter. And I finally asked him what on earth he was looking at. He handed me the plug, and I felt it before I understood it. The plug was magnetic. This is the fifth cheap part, and it is the one everyone ignores. A magnetic drain plug. For a car that came with an ordinary plain plug, you can buy a magnetic replacement for just a few dollars. It screws into the exact same hole, seals with that same copper washer I told you about, and does one quietly miraculous thing. Its magnet reaches into the oil and catches the tiny metal particles that your engine sheds as it wears. Now, here is the secret that Watanabe had spent 40 years perfecting, and the reason he could see the future. Every engine wears a little. That is normal. The metal it sheds is a fine gray paste, like soft mud, and a healthy engine leaves only a whisper of it on the magnet. But when a bearing begins to fail, or a gear inside starts to break down, the particles change. Suddenly there are shiny flakes, bright metallic flecks, sometimes small enough to feel like grit, sometimes big enough to see, and they appear on that magnet weeks or months before the engine ever makes a sound. Watanabe read those magnets like a doctor reads blood. A thin, even gray film, and he handed the keys back and said, "Drive it in peace." Bright flakes catching the light, and he told the owner gently, "We need to look deeper before the choice is taken away from you." He caught failing engines while repairs were still small and cheap, instead of after they had destroyed themselves on a highway far from home. I have searched, and you will almost never find this taught in a Western oil change. They drain your oil, they never look at it, and the plain plug they reuse catches nothing and tells you nothing. All that information about the health of your engine, the early warning that could save you thousands, pours straight into the waste bucket, unread, every single time. So this is what I do now, and this is what I am handing to you as the last and best line on your card. Buy a magnetic drain plug that fits your car. It costs only a few dollars. Have it installed at your next oil change along with a fresh crush washer, of course, and then at every oil change after that, ask one simple thing. Ask them to wipe the magnet clean and show it to you before they reinstall it. Look at what comes off. A soft gray film is the sound of an engine breathing easy. Bright, hard flakes are your engine trying to tell you something while there is still time to listen. That is how a man with no computer and no expensive scanner could see trouble coming from months away. Not magic. A magnet worth a few dollars and the patience to read it. The knowledge existed the whole time. It simply lived in the fingertips of quiet old men in small garages, passed from master to apprentice, while the rest of the world drove past and threw the evidence away. I want you to feel what I felt when I understood all 5 of these together, because standing in those garages, I stopped feeling cheated by cars and started feeling something close to freedom. Everything I had been taught made car ownership feel like helpless spending. Something breaks, you pay, you hope, you repeat, but these 5 cheap parts told a completely different story. A 20-cent copper washer that stops the slow leak, an Iridium plug that fires clean for 100,000 miles, a smear of moly grease that doubles the life of your brakes, a $2 valve that saves your gaskets, and a magnetic plug that lets you read your engine's future in a film of gray. None of it is expensive. None of it needs a young person's back or a specialist's tools. All of it needs only that you know the names and that you ask. I think you are the kind of person who has always suspected this, that underneath the big invoices and the complicated words, the real answers were smaller and simpler and cheaper than anyone wanted to admit. You were right. You were right the whole time. The people who kept these habits alive were not geniuses. They were just careful, and they refused to let the cheap and honest way of doing things be forgotten. Now you are one of the people who knows. So let me ask you one thing, and I truly want your answer. When you next check that magnetic drain plug, or when you finally ask about a part you have never asked about before, I want to know what you find and what your mechanic's face does when you say the names out loud. Tell me in the comments. Tell me which of these 5 you had never heard of, because I am willing to bet at least one of them is brand new to you, and I read what you write. And if something in you feels the way I felt in that little garage in Nagoya, that quiet click of realizing the honest answer was cheap all along, then stay with me. Subscribe and stand with the rest of us who are digging these small, forgotten practices back up, one at a time, before they are lost for good. Because next I am going to take you inside the Japanese habit of the 2-minute engine warm-up, and why the way almost all of us start our cars on a cold morning is quietly shortening their lives. That one changed my mornings completely. I will see you there. Before you go, I want to share something. This video gave you the overview, but there's more. Inside the Quiet Wisdom Circle, I pick up right where we stopped. You can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, not some machine. And you won't be alone, so many mindful folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, cancel any time, one click, no risk. Now, imagine keeping your car running strong for 700,000 miles. In the next video, I'll share the simple, forgotten habits from Japan that make it happen. It's starting right here.